The Ferrari's engine sang, not the rough idle that had embarrassed 5 certified technicians and cost $8,200 in failed repairs. This was pure, 750 revolutions per minute, smooth as silk. Ethan Cole stepped out of the driver's seat, still wearing the navy blue janitor's uniform. The showroom's marble floor caught afternoon sun through floor-to-ceiling windows. 53 people stood recording on their phones. The applause started somewhere near the back, building into a wave. Vanessa Drake stood with arms crossed, face the color of old snow. Diana Hartwell stepped forward from the front row and gestured toward the document on the glass table. The notary's seal caught light. Official. Binding. Ethan's voice carried across the showroom without shouting. 48 hours ago, this woman threw Ferrari keys at my feet and told me I belonged with a mop bucket. She didn't know 3 things. First, I'd already diagnosed what 5 master technicians couldn't find. Second, that morning, my 8-year-old daughter asked if I was embarrassed to be a janitor. And third, I spent 18 years learning to hear what machines whisper when everyone else is shouting. The scene froze. Then everything shattered into static and the screen went black. White letters appeared 48 hours earlier. The apartment smelled like burnt toast. Ethan scraped blackened edges off bread while morning sun tried forcing its way through windows that hadn't been properly cleaned in months. Saturday, 6 a.m. Zara sat at the small table, gap-toothed smile hidden behind concentration as she worked through math homework. Dad, why do you clean cars if you're good at fixing them? Ethan's hand stilled. Sometimes the world needs time to see what you're worth. Her finger traced Naomi's photograph on the table. Mom would be proud, right? His throat tightened. She'd tell you to shoot for bigger than the sky, baby. Naomi's words. She'd said it first drunk on cheap wine at 23. Said it again in the hospital bed when doctors used words like metastatic and palliative. 4 years gone. 4 years of being both parents while also being invisible at work. Prestige Elite Motors occupied a corner lot in Beverly Hills where property values made normal people's eyes water. Ethan clocked in at 7:30, $16.50 per hour. The showroom floor stretched out like a museum. Ferrari's, Lamborghinis, McLarens under spotlights that cost more than his monthly salary. Kyle Brennan found him 20 minutes in. That Ferrari. 5 weeks now. Vanessa's losing her mind. $8,200. 5 different specialists. Master technicians. One guy flew in from Maranello. None of them can figure out why it keeps stalling. Ethan said nothing. He'd learned early that silence served better than speculation. She's got this VIP showcase today. 50 high-net-worth clients. Diana Hartwell's supposed to finalize a $2.1 million order, and our flagship Ferrari's sitting there dead. Ethan knew what was wrong, had known for 3 weeks, documented everything in a 12-page report, had sent it to Vanessa's email at 2 a.m., had watched it disappear into spam because the sender was the detail guy. The showroom filled at noon. Catering staff, decorators, then Vanessa herself in a designer suit that probably cost 3 months of his salary. She moved through the space like she owned it, which she did. Diana Hartwell arrived at 1:30, 58 years old, net worth $185 million, owner of 14 exotic vehicles, the kind of client who could make or break a dealership's quarterly numbers. Other guests arrived in clusters: tech executives, real estate developers, entertainment industry people who treated cars like accessories. Old money, new money, California money that didn't know what to do with itself except spend conspicuously. Vanessa took position near the Ferrari. The hood remained up. Ladies and gentlemen, we pride ourselves on excellence here at Prestige Elite Motors. But excellence isn't just about what we sell. It's about the expertise we provide. Her eyes landed on the Ferrari. For 5 weeks, this vehicle has experienced intermittent stalling issues. We've brought in our most credentialed technicians, factory-trained experts, and none of them have been able to identify the root cause. The pause was theatrical. So I thought, why not try something different, a fresh perspective, unencumbered by traditional thinking? She turned eyes, finding Ethan. Mr. Cole, why don't you give it a try? The crowd followed her gaze. 53 pairs of eyes landing on the black man in a janitor's uniform. Ethan's heart rate didn't change. Years of being looked at, looked through, looked down upon had taught him neutrality. She pulled out the Ferrari's key fob, held it, then threw it underhand so it clattered across marble and came to rest at Ethan's feet. Pick them up, prove me wrong. Ethan looked at the keys, looked at Vanessa, looked at 53 phones already rising. He didn't move. The silence became absolute. I'm not a dog, Mrs. Drake, someone gasped. Phones adjusted angles. Vanessa's smile flickered. Then she laughed. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Ethan Cole, our detail specialist. Apparently, he's also a philosopher. Nervous laughter rippled through the crowd. Vanessa stepped forward, heels clicking. You see this car? $385,000. Stalled, dead. 5 mechanics have tried to fix it. 5 certified specialists. And you know what they all had in common? Ethan said nothing. They all had credentials, training, education, things you will never have. She dropped the keys into his shirt pocket, patting them twice. The Ferrari's yours if you can fix it, but we both know you can't. So why don't you go back to your mop bucket where you belong? She walked away. The crowd parted. Ethan stood alone with 53 cameras recording. But his eyes followed Vanessa Drake with the patience of a man who'd learned that the best response to being underestimated wasn't anger. It was competence. Diana Hartwell stepped forward. Excuse me, Mrs. Drake. Vanessa stopped, turned. Yes, that was quite a performance. I have a question about Mr. Cole's qualifications. Diana held up her phone. This email he sent you 5 weeks ago, subject line Ferrari 488 diagnostic analysis. Urgent. The color drained from Vanessa's face. How did you get that I have resources? Diana swiped her screen. 12 pages. Thermal imaging data. Acoustic frequency analysis. A diagnosis of microfractures in the aluminum mounting bracket. A parts list totaling $42. The crowd went still. You marked it as spam because it came from your detail specialist. Because the idea that a man who cleans your cars might understand them better than your credentialed experts was inconvenient. I never received that email. The lie hung in the air like smoke. You spent $8,200 on 5 specialists who couldn't find what Mr. Cole documented 3 weeks ago. Diana's tone shifted cold. You made it public when you threw keys at a man's feet in front of 50 witnesses. So let's be very public about what happens next. She turned to Ethan. Mr. Cole, I'd like to see you attempt this repair, if you're willing. Ethan pulled the keys from his pocket. I'll need 1 hour, and everyone steps back 10 feet. A man in an expensive suit pushed forward. I'm Gregory Patterson. I specialize in contract law. You made an offer, Mrs. Drake, in front of witnesses. On camera. Under California law, this constitutes promissory estoppel. That was a joke. Entertainment. The law doesn't recognize tone of voice. I'd recommend putting it in writing. Official documentation. Notarized. Diana gestured toward a woman near the back. Sarah handles notarization for my business dealings. Vanessa stood trapped. She could refuse or comply and bet that Ethan would fail. Fine. 1 hour. When you fail, Mr. Cole, you're fired. And if he succeeds, Diana's question cut clean. Vanessa's jaw clenched. The Ferrari is his. She walked to the reception desk, wrote in shaking handwriting. The notary approached. Vanessa signed, pressed her thumbprint, handed the document to Diana like surrendering a weapon. Diana placed it on the glass display table. Witnessed and binding. Ethan walked toward the Ferrari. He set his card aside and pulled out hidden tools. Digital stethoscope wrapped in cloths. Infrared thermometer disguised in the glass cleaner bottle. Jeweler's loop in his pocket. Equipment that had cost him 3 months of salary. Kyle appeared at his elbow. Ethan, what are you doing? My job. You're a detail specialist. Today I'm a mechanic. Dr. Rebecca Sterling stepped forward from the crowd. Mid-50s gray hair professional authority. Excuse me. I'm Dr. Sterling, UCLA Engineering. I consult for Ferrari North America's technical team. May I observe? Ethan handed her the stethoscope, guided her hand to the exact position, watched her eyes widen. 847 hertz. Her voice carried wonder. Primary frequency, with a secondary harmonic around 1240, 1239.8. Ethan's correction was automatic. The precision mattered. Dr. Sterling straightened. I've worked with engineers from Maranello who couldn't identify frequencies that precisely without spectrum analysis equipment. The crowd pressed closer. Ethan pulled out the infrared thermometer, sweeping across the engine bay in a grid pattern. This spot here, 94.3 degrees Celsius. Baseline should be 71. 23 degrees too hot. The heat sink adjacent reads 53.1. 18 degrees too cold. Metal conducting heat where it shouldn't. Dr. Sterling verified with her own device. These thermal variations are exactly consistent with the failure mode you're describing. Vanessa pushed forward. Anyone can point at engine parts and quote numbers. Ethan pulled out the jeweler's loop. Second bolt from the left. You'll need good light. Dr. Sterling examined. Her sharp intake of breath was audible. I see them. 5 microfractures in a radial pattern. Classic thermal stress failure. Vanessa grabbed the loop, stared. I don't see anything. The fractures are 0.3 millimeters wide. You need to know what you're looking for. He straightened, addressed the crowd. 5 mechanics couldn't find this because they were looking at diagnostic screens. The computer sees symptoms, irregular air-fuel mixture, intermittent sensor readings. But computers don't understand mechanical failure. Sterling nodded. The first mechanic probably replaced the ECU. The second probably replaced fuel injectors. The third adjusted timing. All treating symptoms. $8,200 spent fixing things that weren't broken. Because a $42 bracket was failing. Kyle appeared holding a small box. I took the liberty of ordering the replacement part. Overnighted it, he opened the box. Inside sat a new aluminum mounting bracket. Ferrari part number 298847, $42. Dana checked her watch. You have 52 minutes, Mr. Cole, more than enough, but I need everyone to step back. The crowd retreated. Ethan was left alone with the Ferrari and the knowledge he'd accumulated through 18 years of teaching himself what schools wouldn't teach him. He worked methodically, removed the damaged component, cleaned the mounting surface, monitored engine temperature as it cooled to exactly 24 degrees Celsius. Wait, patience rewarded with precision. The new bracket went in at 73 degrees. Not 72, not 74. Installation at wrong temperature created stress points that led to failure. Torque sequence diagonal. 15 foot-pounds initial, then final torque, to 22 across all 4 bolts. Dr. Sterling recorded everything. This level of thermodynamic precision, I've never seen this outside factory settings. My wife taught me that precision matters. She was a paralegal, used to say that details are where truth lives. Was 4 years ago, cancer. I'm sorry, but I think she'd be very proud of what you're doing right now. The installation completed. 47 minutes elapsed. Ethan stepped back. Kyle had appeared with laptop and diagnostic cables. Everything shows normal. All sensor readings baseline. No error codes. Because the problem was never in the sensors. The problem was mechanical. Dr. Sterling addressed the audience. What Mr. Cole just demonstrated represents the pinnacle of diagnostic methodology. This is the most impressive field diagnostic I've ever witnessed. Ethan climbed into the driver's seat. The leather interior smelled like money. He inserted the key, turned it. The engine caught immediately. That perfect idle, 750 RPM smoothed the V8 singing. He revved it gently. 2,000, 4,000, 6,000, each transition seamless. 5 cycles, each flawless. The crowd erupted in applause. Ethan stepped out, closed the door carefully, looked at Vanessa across the expansive showroom floor. She stood alone. The crowd had shifted away, leaving her isolated. Her face had gone through so many expressions it had settled into something blank. The document Diana had placed on the display table seemed to glow. Official, notarized, binding. 53 witnesses. The Ferrari was his. Kyle found Ethan in the service corridor 20 minutes later. We need to talk. That wasn't just a repair demonstration. That was you systematically dismantling everything this place stands for. I fixed a car. You exposed a pattern. Kyle's voice dropped. I've been here 3 years. I've seen Vanessa do this before. The impossible diagnostic tests, always aimed at black mechanics, Latino mechanics, always designed to fail, always followed by blacklisting. How many? At least 7 that I've personally witnessed. Ethan's phone buzzed. Unknown number. Mr. Cole, this is Diana Hartwell. We haven't been formally introduced. I'd like to discuss something with you. Privately, tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock, where I'll send you the address. I suspect Vanessa will be looking for reasons to terminate your employment. I'd like to make you an alternative offer before that happens. The line went dead. Kyle was watching. Who was that? Someone who wants to make sure I land on my feet when Vanessa pushes. If Vanessa pushes. When? Ethan met his eyes. People like Vanessa don't accept being proven wrong. They double down. What are you going to do? I'm going to pick up my daughter, make dinner, help her with homework, be a father. And tomorrow, I'm going to find out what Diana Hartwell wants. He gathered his cleaning supplies. The hidden tools went back into their disguised containers, equipment that represented every bet he'd ever made that competence would eventually matter. Kyle watched him work. You know this video will go viral, right? Ethan had considered that, had felt those phone cameras like pressure against his skin. People will take sides. Some will see talented mechanic finally getting recognition. Others will see a janitor who didn't know his place. It was always part of the conversation. Ethan's voice was quiet. Vanessa just made it loud enough that people couldn't pretend otherwise. His phone buzzed again. Text from the unknown number. One more thing, Mr. Cole. I've been investigating Prestige Elite for 6 months, documenting patterns. What you did today provided the final piece of evidence I needed. Tomorrow we discuss not just your future, but justice for everyone Vanessa has harmed. Diana Hartwell. Ethan stared at the screen. Diana hadn't just shown up. She'd come prepared, had deployed his email at exactly the right moment, had arranged for notary to be present. She'd been building a case, and he'd just provided the evidence she needed. Kyle's voice interrupted. What is it tomorrow's going to be interesting? He left the service corridor, walked through the showroom past Ferraris and Lamborghinis, past the display table where the documents sat, past the spot where Vanessa had thrown keys at his feet. The afternoon sun streamed through windows, turning everything golden. Outside, Los Angeles stretched indifferent to the small drama. But somewhere in that city, 53 people were sharing a video. A man who'd been told he wasn't good enough, proving otherwise. A system designed to gatekeep competence, cracking along fault lines. A moment when the natural order revealed itself to be nothing but agreement among people who benefited from keeping it intact. Ethan walked to his car, a 2008 Honda Civic with 193,000 miles. The kind of vehicle rich people didn't see. But it ran, and it would get him to Zara's friend's house where his daughter waited. Tonight he'd have an answer for why he cleaned cars instead of fixing them. Tomorrow he'd have a conversation with Diana Hartwell that might change everything. But right now, driving through traffic toward the only person who mattered more than vindication, he let himself feel something he hadn't allowed in 4 years. Hope, the kind that whispered bigger than the sky and sounded exactly like Naomi's voice. Monday morning arrived with the particular cruelty that Mondays reserve for people whose weekends have demolished their sense of reality. Ethan woke at 5:30, body still calibrated to the rhythm of shifts that no longer existed, and lay in darkness listening to Zara breathe in the room next door. The video had reached 3.7 million views by the time he'd fallen asleep at midnight. His phone had accumulated 214 notifications he hadn't opened. The world had opinions about what happened Saturday. The world always had opinions. Zara's alarm went off at 6:45. He heard her moving around the particular shuffle thump of an 8-year-old getting dressed while still half asleep. By the time he reached the kitchen, she was already at the table with her science project spread across the surface like evidence at a crime scene. Poster board diagrams she'd drawn in colored marker, a shoebox diorama showing the internal combustion engine with cotton balls for exhaust and aluminum foil for pistons. How car engines work, the title written in her careful block letters across the top. You ready for this? Ethan poured orange juice, watching her face for signs of the anxiety that had kept her quiet during dinner last night. Mrs. Patterson says we're presenting today. Zara's voice was small. First period, you nervous? She looked up. Her eyes carried something he recognized from the mirror, the wariness of someone who'd learned that the world didn't always reward honesty. What if they ask how I know this stuff? Tell them your dad taught you. What if they say you're just a janitor? The question landed like a punch to the solar plexus. Not because it was cruel, though it was, but because it was accurate. Because children had already learned to weaponize class distinctions to enforce hierarchies they didn't understand but knew how to deploy. Then you tell them. Ethan sat across from her, meeting her eyes the way Naomi used to when delivering lessons that mattered. Tell them that what someone does for work and what someone knows are two different things. Tell them your dad can diagnose problems that computers can't find. Tell them competence doesn't need permission from people who don't understand it. Zara's gap-toothed smile appeared tentatively. Like Mom used to say, bigger than the sky. Exactly like that. Jefferson Elementary sat in a neighborhood where property values made jokes about affordability, and the PTA meetings discussed fundraising targets that exceeded Ethan's annual salary. Zara attended on a diversity lottery. One of 15 students bussed in from Koreatown to meet the district's integration requirements. She'd been accepted based on test scores that put her in the 98th percentile for mathematics and the 96th for reading comprehension. The school didn't advertise that part. Easier to frame it as charity than acknowledge they were importing the academic talent their wealthy students couldn't match. Ethan dropped her at the front entrance at 7:50, watched her disappear into the building with her poster board under one arm and her shoebox engine clutched in both hands. Then he sat in the parking lot and waited for his phone to ring. Diana Hartwell called at 8:03. Mr. Cole, her voice carried the briskness of someone accustomed to efficiency. Thank you for making time this morning. You said 10 o'clock. I'm running early. Would you be available now? I'm at a coffee shop 2 blocks from your daughter's school. Wondered if that was coincidence or surveillance. Send me the address. The coffee shop occupied a corner storefront that catered to the neighborhood's aesthetic preferences. Reclaimed wood tables, Edison bulbs, a chalkboard menu listing drinks that cost what Ethan used to spend on lunch for a week. Diana sat in the back corner, laptop open, looking like someone conducting business that mattered. She stood when he approached, extended her hand. The handshake was firm, brief, calculated to convey respect without familiarity. Thank you for meeting me on short notice. You said you had an offer. I do. But first I need to show you something. She turned her laptop so he could see the screen. A spreadsheet dense with data color-coded in ways that suggested months of careful organization. 6 months ago, a friend's son applied for a mechanic position at Prestige Elite Motors. 24 years old, black, 3 years of experience at a Ferrari authorized service center in San Diego. He was told the position had been filled. 2 weeks later, they hired a white candidate with 18 months of experience and no Ferrari background. Diana scrolled down. The spreadsheet expanded. My friend asked me to look into it. Quietly, I started pulling public records. Business licenses, incorporation documents, employment filings. Then I started talking to people. The data multiplied. Names, dates, demographics, interview durations, outcomes. 47 mechanics over 6 years, 89% Black or Latino. Average experience level 14.3 years. Rejection rate 96%. Meanwhile, she opened a second tab. White candidates. Average experience 9.2 years. Acceptance rate 37%. That's not coincidence. Ethan's voice was flat. No, Diana closed the laptop. That's systematic discrimination. And it's not limited to Prestige Elite. She pulled out a physical folder. The old-fashioned kind manila with a metal clasp. Inside documents that looked like they'd been assembled by someone who understood how evidence worked. 6 other luxury dealerships in the Southern California region, all connected through what they call the Professional Standards Committee. Ostensibly, it's about maintaining quality across the industry. In practice, it's a blacklist network. She spread the documents across the table. Letterhead from different companies, all signed by the same 3 people. If you get flagged at one dealership, the others receive notification. Unofficial, unwritten, but absolutely coordinated. How many people we've identified? 73 mechanics who've been systematically excluded. Diana's finger traced columns of data. Average time unemployed after blacklisting 14 months. Percentage who left the industry entirely 41%. Estimated lost wages across all 73 individuals, $3.2 million over the 6-year period. The numbers settled like stones in Ethan's stomach. $3.2 million. 73 families. Careers destroyed not through incompetence, but through coordinated discrimination that hid behind professional standards and quality control and the language people used when they meant racism, but didn't want to say it. You've been building a case. I've been documenting a pattern. Dana's correction was precise. What you did Saturday provided something I couldn't get through research. You demonstrated competence so undeniable that it exposed the lie underlying the entire system. Ethan looked at the spreadsheet, the documents, the evidence assembled, with the kind of methodical patience that separated people who wanted justice from people who achieved it. What do you need from me? I need you to be willing to go public. Formally, on record, Diana's eyes held his. The video from Saturday will go viral, regardless of what we do. But viral videos fade. What doesn't fade is legal documentation. Depositions, federal complaints. The kind of evidence that forces institutional change rather than temporary embarrassment. You want me to sue Vanessa? I want you to file a complaint with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. Federal jurisdiction, pattern and practice discrimination. Diana pulled another document from her folder. I have an attorney prepared to represent you. Pro bono, she specializes in employment discrimination cases and has a 93% success rate. Pro bono, she believes in the case. Also believes the publicity will attract other clients. Diana smiled slightly. Altruism and self-interest aren't mutually exclusive. Ethan's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen. The school. His heart rate spiked. I need to take this. Diana nodded. Mr. Cole. The school secretary's voice carried professional concern that probably meant trouble. We've had an incident involving Zara. Nothing serious, but we'd like you to come in if possible. What kind of incident? She became upset during her science presentation. We've moved her to the counselor's office. She's asking for you. The drive back to Jefferson Elementary took 4 minutes that felt like 40. Ethan parked illegally, didn't care, moved through the building's front office with the barely controlled urgency of a parent who'd been told nothing serious, while knowing that schools define serious differently than parents did. The counselor's office was decorated with motivational posters about believing in yourself and reaching for dreams. Zara sat in a chair too big for her arms wrapped around her poster board, tears cutting tracks through the remnants of breakfast she hadn't quite wiped from her face. Baby, Ethan knelt in front of her. What happened? Her voice came out small and broken. I did the presentation. Like you said, I explained about engines and combustion and how the pistons work. You did great then. Brandon asked how I knew all that. She hiccuped. I said my dad taught me. He said his dad says my dad is just a janitor who got lucky, that the Ferrari thing was fake, that you probably broke it yourself so you could pretend to fix it. Ethan felt rage crystallize in his chest. Not the hot kind that exploded, the cold kind that calculated exactly where to apply pressure to cause maximum structural damage. What did you say? I said you're not just a janitor. You're a mechanic. You're smart. You know things that other people don't know. Zara's grip on the poster board tightened. Mrs. Patterson said I should calm down. Said maybe I was getting too emotional about the topic. Said maybe we should focus on simpler projects next time. The counselor cleared her throat from behind her desk. Zara did become quite agitated. We understand she's proud of her father, but the disruption to the classroom. She was defending her family. Ethan's voice was level. Because another student called her father a liar based on information his father provided. Information that's demonstrably false given that millions of people have now watched me repair that Ferrari. The counselor shifted uncomfortably. We don't control what students hear at home, but you do control how you respond when those students bring prejudice into your classroom. Ethan stood, bringing Zara with him. You can tell Mrs. Patterson that Zara won't be completing any simpler projects. She'll be completing projects that challenge her because that's what education is supposed to do. And if that makes other students uncomfortable, perhaps their parents should consider why their children feel threatened by a black girl demonstrating competence. He guided Zara toward the door. The counselor made a sound like she wanted to object, then apparently reconsidered the optics of preventing a parent from leaving with his child. The Honda's interior smelled like old coffee and the particular staleness of a vehicle that had accumulated too many miles. Zara climbed into the back seat, still clutching her poster board. Ethan sat behind the wheel but didn't start the engine. You did nothing wrong. His voice filled the small space. You hear me? Nothing. It feels wrong because the world isn't fair yet. Ethan turned to look at her. But your mom used to say that unfairness is just an invitation to make things better. That's what we're doing. How? By not hiding anymore. By showing people what I actually know instead of pretending to be less than I am. By making sure what happened to me doesn't happen to other people. Zara wiped her nose on her sleeve. Is that why you fixed the Ferrari? To show people I fixed the Ferrari because it needed fixing? The showing part was just what happened when someone finally gave me the chance. Ethan started the engine. Come on, we're going home. You're taking the day off. Am I in trouble with me? Never. With school? He smiled. We'll deal with that tomorrow. They drove back to the apartment through morning traffic that cared nothing about small humiliations and large injustices. Zara fell asleep in the back seat, exhausted by emotion. Ethan carried her inside, tucked her into bed, still wearing her school clothes, and stood for a moment watching her breathe. Naomi would have known what to say, would have found words that validated hurt while providing perspective, would have explained that fighting back sometimes meant accepting short-term consequences for long-term justice. But Naomi was 4 years gone, and Ethan had to figure out how to be both parents with only his own inadequate toolkit. His phone showed 47 missed calls, 17 voicemails, 83 text messages. The video had reached 7.2 million views. Someone had created a hashtag. Journalists wanted interviews. A talk show had extended an invitation. Someone claiming to be a literary agent wanted to discuss book deals. The world had decided he was a story worth telling. The world didn't ask if he wanted to be told. Diana called again at noon. I heard about the school incident. Her voice carried something that might have been sympathy. I'm sorry. How did you hear? I have a contact at the school board. Wanted to make sure there wasn't official retaliation being planned. Is there? Not yet. But the family who filed the complaint about Zara's behavior has significant donor status. They're pushing for a formal apology. From an 8-year-old who defended her father against false accusations. Welcome to How Power Works. Diana's tone was dry. They don't need to be right. They just need to be influential. Ethan walked to the window. Koreatown stretched out below buildings stacked against each other like defensive formations. Tell your attorney I'm in. Whatever needs to be filed, I'll sign it. You're sure my daughter just got punished for telling the truth? Ethan's jaw clenched. I'm done letting people with power define what truth is allowed to matter. Good. Diana's approval was audible. I'll have documents ready by end of business today. We'll file with the EEOC tomorrow morning. Federal complaint pattern and practice discrimination, 73 documented victims across 6 companies. What happens to Vanessa legally? She'll be investigated. If the EEOC finds merit, she'll face fines, mandatory policy changes, possible civil penalties. Diana paused. But the real damage will be reputational. Once this becomes official, every client who's done business with Prestige Elite will have to decide if they want to be associated with documented discrimination. And the other 72 mechanics, we contact them. Offer inclusion in the complaint. Build a class action if enough join. She hesitated. This could take years, Ethan. Federal investigations move slowly. Justice delayed is still justice delayed. But it's still justice. Eventually. Maybe. If we're lucky and the system works the way it's supposed to. Diana's realism was almost refreshing. I won't lie to you. This will get worse before it gets better. Vanessa will fight back. The other dealerships will circle wagons. You'll be painted as an opportunist, a troublemaker. Someone who manipulated circumstances for personal gain. They're already saying that. They'll say it louder. With lawyers. Diana's voice hardened. So I need you to be absolutely certain. Because once we file, there's no taking it back. Ethan looked at Zara's closed door. Thought about Naomi's legal knowledge, the hours she'd spent explaining civil rights statutes and employment law, and the mechanisms through which justice theoretically flowed. Thought about 47 mechanics dismissed over 6 years and 73 careers destroyed and $3.2 million in stolen wages. File it. The investigation began that night. Not the federal investigation that would take weeks to initiate, but Ethan's investigation. The one Diana's research had started but couldn't complete because she wasn't the one who'd lived inside Prestige Elite's machinery for 9 months. He started with what he already knew. Access codes to the building that janitors needed for after-hours cleaning. Security systems he'd observed being armed and disarmed. Camera positions he'd cataloged while pretending to clean. The geography of a workplace that didn't see custodial staff as people who might be paying attention. Tuesday night, 11:40. Ethan used his keycard to enter through the service entrance. The alarm system chirped. He entered the code he'd watched Kyle use 17 times. The chirping stopped. The showroom was different at night, emptier. The cars still gleamed under emergency lighting, but without people around, they looked less like status symbols and more like what they actually were. Machines, beautiful, expensive, carefully engineered machines that existed at the intersection of art and transportation. The administrative offices occupied the second floor, HR department at the end of the hallway. Ethan had cleaned those offices every Thursday for 9 months. Had emptied trash cans while HR Director Patricia Montgomery talked on the phone about retention rates and cultural fit and the importance of maintaining standards. Had wiped down her desk while she was at lunch, seeing without really looking at the documents she left scattered across surfaces. Now he looked. Carefully. Methodically. With the phone Naomi had taught him to use as a document scanner, capturing images that would hold up as evidence if properly authenticated. The filing cabinets weren't locked. Why would they be? Who would want to break into HR files except the very people who'd been systematically excluded and therefore didn't have access? Ethan photographed methodically. Employment applications with handwritten notes in the margins. Declined, not our standard. Cultural concerns. Doesn't project appropriate image. Interview notes that spent 3 sentences on white candidates' qualifications and 1 sentence on minority candidates' thanks, but no. The notes were careful, never explicitly racial, but the pattern was undeniable when viewed in aggregate. 47 applications from Black or Latino mechanics over 6 years. 45 rejections. The 2 who'd been hired lasted an average of 4 months before being terminated for violations that white employees committed without consequence. He found his own application. Date stamped from 9 months ago. The notes read, overqualified for custodial but suitable. Keep invisible during client hours. Keep invisible. The words crystallized something that had been forming in Ethan's chest for 9 months. Not just anger. Clarity. The understanding that invisibility had never been about his inadequacy. It had been about their discomfort with competence that didn't match their expectations. The second filing cabinet held personnel records. Ethan photographed systematically. Names, demographics, hire dates. Termination dates, stated reasons for dismissal. The pattern emerged like a photograph in developing solution. Minority employees clustered in positions clients didn't see. Service technicians in the back bay, parts department, custodial, administrative support in windowless offices. The front-facing positions, the ones that interacted with wealthy clients, were 94% white. The discrepancy was absolute enough to suggest policy rather than coincidence. He found the email archive next, not Vanessa's personal account that would be password protected, but the general HR account that received applications and sent rejection letters. The account that included carbon copies of internal discussions about hiring decisions. The recordings were even better. California's one-party consent law meant Ethan could legally record conversations he participated in, but he hadn't participated in the conversations he was about to document. These required different justification: workplace safety, documentation of policy violations, protection of employee rights. The legal gray area didn't bother him as much as it should have. Naomi had taught him that justice sometimes required operating in the spaces between what was clearly legal and what was clearly illegal. That the law protected people with resources to exploit it and punished people who couldn't afford to hire exploitation. He set his phone to record and opened the HR shared drive. The folder marked Hiring Committee Deliberations contained exactly what the name suggested. Audio files from meetings where Vanessa and Kyle and Patricia discussed candidates. The recordings were kept for quality assurance purposes, to ensure consistent application of hiring standards. Ethan listened through earbuds while his phone captured audio from the laptop speakers. Technically degraded quality, but admissible if properly disclosed. The third recording from 6 months ago made his hands shake. Vanessa's voice discussing a candidate named Marcus Williams, 28 years old, 8 years of experience, ASE Master, certified in 4 specializations. He's qualified on paper. Vanessa's voice carried the hesitation that came before rejection. But I'm concerned about client perception. Our Beverly Hills clientele expects a certain aesthetic. Kyle's voice uncertain. His resume is stronger than anyone we've interviewed this quarter, which is exactly why we need to be careful. Prestige Elite built its reputation on excellence. That means every touchpoint needs to communicate the right message. Vanessa paused. Does Marcus Williams communicate excellence to clients spending $400,000 on a vehicle? Patricia's voice administrative and cold. We could bring him in for a trial period, back bay only. See if he adapts to our culture. I'd rather not invest the training resources. Vanessa's decision was final. Send the standard rejection. Thanks, but no. The recording continued for another 14 minutes, discussing candidates with less impressive credentials who received invitations to interview. All white, all projecting appropriate aesthetics. Ethan photographed the file metadata, date-time participants. Then he moved to the next recording, and the next, building a catalog of decisions that never explicitly mentioned race, but consistently produced racially disparate outcomes. By 3 in the morning, he'd accumulated 247 photographs, 83 minutes of audio recordings, documentation that transformed Diana's statistical analysis into concrete evidence of systematic discrimination. He backed everything up to 3 separate cloud storage accounts, encrypted, password protected, accessible from anywhere if something happened to his phone. Then he cleaned up, returned files to their precise positions, wiped down surfaces he'd touched, reset the computer to its locked state, left the office looking exactly as he'd found it, because invisible people knew how to move through spaces without leaving traces. The drive home felt different, longer, weighted with the knowledge that he'd just crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Breaking into offices, copying confidential files, recording private conversations. The kind of evidence gathering that defense attorneys would attack as fruit of the poisonous tree if they could prove illegal access. But California's employment law had specific provisions about employer records. Employees had rights to access information about their own employment. Former employees could request documentation. And people investigating systematic discrimination had certain protections when gathering evidence of civil rights violations. Naomi's voice in his memory. The law is a weapon, baby. You just need to know which end to hold. He reached the apartment at 4:15. Zara was asleep. The video had reached 12 million views. Someone had started a GoFundMe that he hadn't authorized and didn't want. People he'd never met were arguing about him in comment sections, deciding whether he was a hero or a fraud based on 30 seconds of footage and their existing prejudices. The world had opinions. The world would always have opinions. Ethan uploaded the files to Diana's secure server, sent her an encrypted message. Have evidence. Substantial. Need to discuss authentication procedures. Her response came back within 5 minutes despite the hour tomorrow. 10 a.m. My office. Bring nothing physical. We'll discuss digital chain of custody. He managed 3 hours of sleep before Zara's alarm went off. Wednesday morning, school. Normalcy attempted despite everything that had changed. Zara was quieter than usual over breakfast, picking at cereal instead of eating it. Her science project poster still leaned against the wall where she'd abandoned it Monday afternoon. Do I have to go back? Her voice was small. To school, yes. To that specific presentation, no. I called Mrs. Patterson. Told her you'd be submitting a written report instead. Did you tell her why I told her that public speaking clearly wasn't working for you right now, and that written work would better demonstrate your knowledge? Ethan poured coffee he didn't want. She didn't argue. Because of the Harrisons. Zara's observation was matter of fact. The family that complained. Brandon's parents. Because some people have more power than others. Ethan sat across from her. And schools listen to people with power even when those people are wrong. That's not fair. No, but fair and true are different things. Your mom used to say that accepting unfairness doesn't mean surrendering to it. Sometimes it means choosing which battles matter most. Is this a battle that matters? Ethan thought about the 73 mechanics, the $3.2 million in lost wages, the systematic pattern that had operated for 6 years because people with power decided who deserved opportunities and who didn't. Yeah, this battle matters, which is why we're going to fight it carefully, strategically, the way people win when they don't have power but they do have evidence. Zara pushed her cereal away. I wish Mom was here. Me too, baby, every day. Diana's office occupied the top floor of a building in Century City where the rent cost more per month than Ethan made in a year. The reception area was decorated with photographs of vehicles that belonged in museums. A 1967 Ferrari 275 GTB, a 1955 Mercedes 300 SL Gullwing, a 1973 Porsche Carrera RS in original paint. Diana appeared exactly at 10. She wore business casual that probably cost more than his entire wardrobe and carried herself with the confidence of someone who'd earned every dollar through competence rather than inheritance. The files you sent, she gestured toward her private office. We need to discuss acquisition methodology before we can determine admissibility. I have janitor access to the building. Ethan followed her into an office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. I documented employer records during work hours as permitted under California Labor Code Section 1198.5. Diana raised an eyebrow. You've been reading employment law. My wife was a paralegal. She taught me that rights only matter if you know they exist. Smart woman. Diana sat behind a desk that looked like it cost more than his car. The recordings present a different challenge. One-party consent covers conversations you participate in. These appear to be third-party recordings, captured from employer equipment on employer premises during the course of investigating potential civil rights violations. Ethan had spent the previous afternoon researching precedent. Federal law permits documentation of discriminatory practices when gathered by affected employees or their representatives. Are you an affected employee? I'm an employee who was kept in a custodial position despite qualifications that exceeded most of their certified technicians. An employee whose diagnostic report was ignored because it came from the detail guy. Ethan met her eyes. An employee who was publicly humiliated by an owner who threw keys at my feet and told me I belonged with a mop bucket. Diana nodded slowly. We'll need to be careful about how we present this. But I think we can make a strong argument for admissibility under the whistleblower protections in California's Fair Employment and Housing Act. She pulled up the files on her computer, began clicking through photographs. The notes in the margins became visible on her larger screen. Not our standard. Cultural concerns. Doesn't project appropriate image. This is damning. Her voice carried satisfaction. Systematic. Documented. Impossible to explain away as individual bias when it's repeated across 47 applications. The recordings are worse. She listened to the Marcus Williams discussion. Her expression hardened with each evasion, each coded phrase, each decision that prioritized aesthetic over qualification. Client perception. Appropriate aesthetic. Communicating the right message. Diana's voice was cold. They're not even trying to hide it. They just assume no one will ever hear these recordings who matters. They assumed the people who mattered agreed with them. Probably true. Diana closed the file. Old money Los Angeles has been protecting itself since before either of us was born. The difference is we now have documentation and federal law and a political climate that's at least theoretically interested in addressing systematic discrimination. Theoretically, it's better than nothing. She pulled up a calendar. The EEOC complaint gets filed today. I've already contacted 43 of the 73 mechanics we identified. 27 have agreed to be included. The others are scared of retaliation or have moved on or don't believe the system will actually help them. 27 is enough for a pattern, more than enough. Diana's smile was sharp. But I want you to understand what happens next. Vanessa will be formally notified. She'll hire attorneys, expensive ones. They'll attack everything. Your credibility, your methodology, your motives. They'll claim you stole proprietary information, that you fabricated evidence, that this is revenge for being fired. I haven't been fired yet. You will be, probably today. Diana's certainty was absolute. She can't keep you employed now. You're too visible, too problematic. She'll find cause. Insubordination policy violations, something that sounds legitimate enough to justify termination. Let her try, she will, and then we'll add wrongful termination to the complaint. Retaliation against a whistleblower. Diana walked to the window. This is going to get ugly, Ethan. Uglier than you're imagining. People who've built fortunes on systematic discrimination don't surrender gracefully. I know. Ethan thought about Zara crying in the counselor's office, about Naomi in the hospital bed explaining that justice was a long game, about the 47 mechanics who'd been told they weren't good enough when the truth was they'd been too competent for people who needed to feel superior. I'm ready. The call from Kyle came at 2:30 that afternoon. Ethan was helping Zara with math homework, watching her work through long division with the intense concentration she brought to problems that required methodical thinking. Ethan, Kyle's voice carried strain. Vanessa wants to see you today. 4 o'clock. Her office. Am I still employed? For now, but he hesitated. Bring someone with you. Witness. Attorney. Someone. Why? Because she's planning something. I don't know what, but I've seen her make that face before. Right before she destroys people. Ethan called Diana, explained the summons. I'll be there. Her response was immediate. With my attorney. This is probably the termination conversation, but we'll document everything. Prestige Elite Motors looked the same as it had Saturday. Ferraris and Lamborghinis gleaming under spotlights. Marble floors reflecting expensive machinery. The natural order maintained through aesthetics that communicated wealth and exclusivity and the careful preservation of boundaries. Except the Ferrari was gone. The 488 GTB that had been centerpiece of Saturday's humiliation no longer occupied its position. In its place sat a Lamborghini Aventador in electric blue gleaming and new and presumably capable of starting without 5 weeks of diagnostic drama. Kyle met them at the entrance. His face carried the expression of someone watching a car crash in slow motion. She's waiting. Conference room, not her office. Power move. Diana's observation was clinical. Conference room gives her institutional authority, makes this about the company rather than personal. They rode the elevator in silence, exited into the administrative floor where Ethan had photographed files 3 nights ago. The conference room occupied the corner glass walls, providing views of the city and transparency that suggested nothing to hide. Vanessa sat at the head of a table that could seat 12. She wasn't alone. 2 men in suits flanked her. Attorneys based on the leather portfolios and the particular expression that lawyers deployed when preparing to perform aggression disguised as procedure. Mr. Cole, Vanessa's voice was controlled, flat, nothing like the theatrical performance from Saturday. Thank you for coming. This is Martin Caldwell and James Morrison, our legal counsel. Diana stepped forward. Diana Hartwell. And this is Rebecca Morrison, no relation employment law specialist. We're here to ensure this conversation proceeds appropriately. The attorneys exchanged glances. Clearly, this wasn't the power dynamic they'd expected. Vanessa opened a folder. Mr. Cole, we've completed an investigation into irregularities surrounding Saturday's incident. We've discovered significant concerns. Ethan said nothing. Naomi had taught him that silence was often the best response when people were building cases against themselves. First, Vanessa pulled out a document. You accessed employer computer systems without authorization on Tuesday night at 11:47 p.m. Security footage shows you entering the building and accessing the HR department. I have janitor access. Cleaning the building is part of my job description. Accessing confidential files is not. Vanessa's voice hardened. You photographed proprietary documents, copied private communications, recorded internal discussions. I documented evidence of systematic employment discrimination as permitted under California Labor Code Section 1198.5 and protected under Fair Employment and Housing Act whistleblower provisions. Ethan's voice remained level. The communications I recorded involved discussions of my own employment and the employment of similarly situated individuals. Martin Caldwell leaned forward. You're terminated, effective immediately, for cause. Unauthorized access to confidential information theft of proprietary data, violation of privacy policies. Rebecca Morrison pulled out her own folder. We anticipated this. My client filed a formal EEOC complaint this morning documenting 6 years of systematic racial discrimination at Prestige Elite Motors and 6 affiliated dealerships. The evidence Mr. Cole gathered supports that complaint. Terminating him now constitutes retaliation against a whistleblower under federal law. That's absurd. Vanessa's control cracked slightly. He stole confidential information. He documented civil rights violations. Rebecca's voice was surgical. There's legal precedent distinguishing theft from evidence gathering when investigating discrimination, especially when that evidence demonstrates pattern and practice violations affecting 73 documented individuals. The number landed like a grenade, 73. Suddenly, this wasn't about one difficult employee. This was about systematic behavior that could trigger federal investigations, civil penalties, consent decrees. James Morrison recovered first. We deny any discrimination. Our hiring practices comply fully with all applicable laws. Any statistical disparities result from qualifications-based selection, not racial bias. Then you should have no problem with a federal investigation. Diana's smile was pleasant. The EEOC will review all hiring records, interview all rejected candidates, analyze all employment data. If your practices are truly unbiased, you'll be vindicated. This is extortion. Vanessa stood. You're using fabricated allegations to avoid consequences for actual theft. Nothing's fabricated. Ethan finally spoke. I have recordings of you discussing Marcus Williams, saying his resume was stronger than anyone you'd interviewed that quarter, then rejecting him because you were concerned about client perception and appropriate aesthetics. Your words. The conference room went silent. You recorded private discussions. Vanessa's voice shook. That's illegal. California's one-party consent applies to conversations where I have a reasonable expectation my interests are being discussed. Ethan pulled out his phone. I also have recordings from last Thursday, when you told Patricia Montgomery that you wanted to limit minority hiring to positions clients wouldn't see because maintaining brand image required careful attention to optics. I never said that. You did. Thursday, 2:15 p.m. You were standing outside the HR office. I was cleaning the hallway. California law is very clear that people have no expectation of privacy in workplace common areas. Vanessa sat down slowly. Her face had gone from controlled to pale. Rebecca Morrison placed documents on the table. EEOC complaint, 73 identified victims, 27 participating plaintiffs, statistical analysis showing hiring disparities consistent with systematic discrimination, audio evidence documenting racially coded decision-making, photographic evidence of written notes containing discriminatory language. She slid another document across. Preliminary demand, $3.2 million in compensatory damages distributed among affected mechanics. Policy reforms including third-party oversight of hiring decisions. Mandatory anti-discrimination training for all management personnel. Public acknowledgement of discriminatory practices. This is blackmail. Martin Caldwell's objection was automatic. This is pre-litigation settlement discussion. Rebecca's correction was calm. We're providing you opportunity to address this privately before it becomes public litigation. Of course, given that the video from Saturday has now reached 18 million views, privacy may already be compromised. Ethan watched Vanessa's face cycle through expressions. Rage, fear, calculation. The particular desperation of someone who'd built an identity on superiority and was watching that foundation crack. He almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Then he remembered Zara crying in the counselor's office. Remembered 47 mechanics told they weren't good enough. Remembered $3.2 million in stolen wages and the careful, systematic destruction of careers that happened when people with power decided who deserved opportunity. We need time to review these allegations. James Morrison was already planning strategy. Our clients categorically deny discrimination. Any settlement would be without admission of wrongdoing. Take your time. Diana stood. The EEOC doesn't require your cooperation to investigate. They can subpoena records independently. We're simply offering you the chance to resolve this with some control over the narrative. How much time you have until Friday to respond to the settlement proposal? Rebecca collected her documents. After that, we proceed with formal litigation and media engagement. The meeting ended. Attorneys gathering papers, positions, established battle lines drawn. Ethan walked out of the conference room he'd cleaned every Thursday for 9 months, past the showroom floor where Vanessa had thrown keys at his feet, into the afternoon sun that turned Los Angeles golden and indifferent. Diana touched his arm as they reached her car. You okay? Ethan thought about it, honestly considered the question. I will be. That was impressive in there. Knowing the exact statutes, the recording laws, the precedent. Diana unlocked her car. Your wife taught you well. She taught me that knowledge is the only weapon that matters when you're fighting people with institutional power. Ethan looked back at the building, and that patience beats rage every time. His phone buzzed. Text from a number he didn't recognize. Mr. Cole, this is Hannah Brooks. We spoke briefly for Diana's investigation. I heard about the EEOC complaint. I want in. I have emails, performance reviews that praised my work right until they fired me for cultural fit issues. I want these people to answer for what they did. Then another text. Different number. Jerome Carter here. Count me in. I have documentation of the different uniform policy. Photographs. I want my name on that complaint. Then another, and another. Word spreading through networks of people who'd been systematically excluded. People who'd been told the problem was them, their qualifications, their fit. People who were learning that the problem had never been individual inadequacy. It had been coordinated discrimination, hiding behind professional standards. By the time Ethan reached his car, 7 more mechanics had contacted him. By the time he got home, the number had reached 15. By the time Zara got out of school, 23 people who'd been broken by the same system were volunteering to fight back. Zara found him at the kitchen table, laptop open, his spreadsheet, expanding with names and contact information and documentation being offered. Did we win? Her question was simple. Direct. The kind children ask when they still believe winning and losing are clearly defined. Not yet. Ethan pulled her close. But we're building something that might become winning eventually. What are we building? Evidence. Community. A case that's too big to ignore and too documented to dismiss. He showed her the spreadsheet. These are people who went through what I went through, who were told they weren't good enough when they were actually better than the people rejecting them. Zara studied the screen. That's 23 people. 23 so far. By Friday, it might be 40. By next month, it might be all 73. Ethan saved the file. Your mom used to say that justice is just people deciding to stop accepting injustice. That's what's happening. Do you think Vanessa will pay the money? I think Vanessa's going to fight with everything she has. Because admitting what she did means admitting her entire worldview was wrong. Ethan closed the laptop. But sometimes you have to fight people not because you'll win, but because losing while fighting is better than accepting defeat without trying. That's what Mom would say. Zara's voice was quiet, bigger than the scum, exactly like that. The phone rang again. Diana, her voice carried urgency that suggested news. Richard Drake just called me, Vanessa's husband, and he wants to cooperate, fully. He's filing for divorce and he's willing to provide documentation that Vanessa deliberately structured the business to enable discrimination. Apparently, he's been trying to reform the hiring practices for 2 years and she's blocked him at every turn. Why would he help us? Diana's laugh was bitter. Because he's already being investigated for tax fraud completely unrelated to this case. His attorney advised full cooperation with federal authorities on all matters to demonstrate good faith. Also, because his prenup includes a morality clause that voids her claim to half his personal assets if she's found to have engaged in illegal discriminatory practices. So he's protecting his money. He's protecting his money. But his testimony will provide insider documentation of intentional discrimination, which is exactly what we need to upgrade this from pattern and practice to deliberate civil rights violations. Ethan thought about it. Vanessa surrounded by lawyers and a husband providing prosecution evidence and 73 mechanics demanding justice and a video watched by 18 million people. The walls closing in from every direction because she'd decided to throw keys at someone she considered beneath her. Tell Richard we'll take his testimony, everything he has, documents, emails, recordings, first-hand knowledge of decision-making, already done. Diana's satisfaction was audible. We're filing amended complaints tomorrow, adding deliberate discrimination charges, requesting punitive damages in addition to compensatory. This just became federal civil rights prosecution territory. How long until resolution years? Maybe, if we're lucky and the system works. Diana paused. Or Vanessa settles before Friday to avoid public prosecution. Fear is a powerful motivator when your entire reputation is at stake. The call ended. Ethan sat in the kitchen while Zara did homework at the table, and the afternoon faded into evening. And somewhere in Beverly Hills, a woman who'd built her identity on keeping people in their places was learning what happened when the places refused to hold. His phone buzzed one more time. Kyle, I'm quitting. Text message, not call. Couldn't stay after what I heard in that conference room. Couldn't be part of it anymore. I have documentation too. Performance reviews showing minority employees consistently rated lower than white employees for identical work. I'll testify if you need me. Ethan stared at the message. Kyle, who'd known and said nothing, who'd benefited from the same system that excluded others, who'd chosen complicity through silence until the evidence became too overwhelming to ignore. Justice collected allies from strange places, people who'd been comfortable with injustice until it became too visible to pretend they hadn't seen it. He typed back, "Thank you. We'll be in touch." Then he closed his phone and helped Zara with her math homework, reminded her that long division required patience and that carrying remainders mattered, and that some problems couldn't be solved quickly, but could always be solved correctly if you took the time to work through each step. The kind of lesson that applied to mathematics and to justice, and to the slow work of building cases against people who'd spent years believing they were untouchable. Outside Los Angeles turned from gold to purple to darkness. Somewhere in that city, Vanessa Drake was making decisions about settlement versus litigation. Somewhere, 23 mechanics were gathering documentation they'd kept for years, hoping someday it would matter. Somewhere, the video kept playing, 18 million views, becoming 19 million, becoming 20 million, each view another person watching injustice become visible. And in a small apartment in Koreatown, a man who'd been told he belonged with a mop bucket was teaching his daughter that patience and evidence and refusing to stay invisible were the tools that change corners of the world. Not the whole world, not yet, maybe never. But the corner they stood in, that was changing. And sometimes corners were enough. Friday arrived carrying the weight of deadlines and decisions that couldn't be postponed. Vanessa had until close of business to respond to the settlement proposal. Diana had made that clear in writing certified mail, with enough legal precision to ensure no one could claim miscommunication. The call came at 9:15 in the morning. Not from Vanessa's attorneys, from Vanessa herself. Mr. Cole. Her voice sounded different, smaller, like someone who'd spent the week watching their world dismantle itself piece by careful piece. I'd like to speak with you. In person. No attorneys, no recordings, just a conversation. Ethan put the phone on speaker so Diana could hear from across her office. Why? Because Vanessa's breath caught. Because I need to understand something. And I think you're the only person who can explain it. Diana shook her head, mouthing the word trap. But Ethan saw something else. An opportunity. Not for reconciliation, that ship had burned and sunk, but for clarity. For the kind of closure that came from making people face exactly what they'd done. Where MacArthur Park, the bench near the lake. Noon. Vanessa paused. Please. The park was neutral territory, public, witnesses everywhere, the kind of place where violence was unlikely and conversation was just conversation witnessed by joggers and families and people who had no stake in luxury car dealerships or systematic discrimination. Ethan arrived early, found the bench Vanessa had specified, sat watching ducks paddle across water that reflected the city's indifference to human drama. She appeared at 12:03, designer clothes replaced by jeans and a simple blouse, hair pulled back without styling, makeup minimal. She looked like someone who'd stopped performing and hadn't yet figured out what came after performance ended. Thank you for coming. She sat on the opposite end of the bench, maintaining distance. I wasn't sure you would. You said you had questions. Vanessa watched the ducks for a long moment. How did you stay so calm when I threw those keys, when I said those things? You just stood there like nothing I said could touch you, because nothing you said was about me. Ethan's voice was level. Your words revealed who you are. They didn't change who I am. But you must have been angry. Rage doesn't solve problems. It just makes them louder. He watched her face process this. My wife taught me that anger is what you feel when you can't fix something immediately. Patience is what you deploy when you're building solutions that last. I've lost everything. Vanessa's admission came out broken. The dealership, my husband, my reputation. Clients are canceling contracts. The bank is calling loans. My father built that business over 40 years, and I destroyed it in 48 hours. You destroyed it over 6 years. Ethan's correction was gentle but absolute. Saturday was just when everyone else saw what you'd been doing. Tears tracked down her face. Real ones. Not the theatrical kind that wealthy people deployed for effect. I didn't think I was being racist. I genuinely didn't. I thought I was maintaining standards, protecting the brand, ensuring our clientele felt comfortable. You thought black mechanics would make white clients uncomfortable, I thought. She struggled. I thought excellence had a certain look, a certain background, a certain... She stopped. I sound like my father. You do. Ethan turned to face her fully. Your father taught you that some people are born to lead and others are born to serve. That credentials matter more than competence. That the natural order exists and maintaining it is a virtue. He was wrong. He was wrong, and you believed him because it was easier than questioning everything you'd built your identity on. Ethan's voice softened fractionally. I don't think you're evil, Vanessa. I think you're what happens when privilege calcifies into prejudice and no one ever makes you examine the foundation. What do I do now? You start by signing the settlement. You acknowledge what you did. You make restitution to the 73 people whose careers you damaged. You implement the policy changes and submit to oversight and accept that you don't get to define excellence anymore. Ethan stood. And then you spend the rest of your life becoming someone your father didn't raise you to be. Is that enough? No. Nothing you do will erase what you've done, but it's a start. And starting is better than pretending nothing needs to change. He walked away, left her sitting on the bench with her tears and her destroyed certainty and the wreckage of a worldview that couldn't survive contact with accountability. Diana was waiting in her car 3 blocks away. She looked up from her phone as Ethan climbed in. How did it go? She's broken. Ethan buckled his seatbelt. Whether that translates to settlement remains to be seen. Her attorneys called 15 minutes ago. Diana's smile was sharp. They're accepting our terms. Full settlement. $3.2 million distributed among the 73 mechanics. Policy reforms with third-party oversight. Public acknowledgement of discriminatory practices. Vanessa personally barred from any management role for 5 years. When do we sign Monday morning? Federal courthouse. Judge has to approve the settlement terms because it includes EEOC oversight provisions. Diana started the car. This is happening, Ethan. Real change. Institutional reform. Justice that actually materializes instead of just getting discussed. The hearing happened in a courtroom that smelled like old wood and newer desperation. Federal judges handled hundreds of cases, most settling before trial justice administered through paperwork rather than drama. But this case had attention. 18 million views had become 23 million. News outlets wanted statements. Civil rights organizations were watching to see if systematic discrimination could actually be addressed through legal mechanisms. Judge Patricia Morrison, no relation to either attorney, presided with the efficiency of someone who'd spent 30 years determining what constituted fair resolution. She reviewed the settlement terms with the same methodical precision Ethan used when diagnosing engines. $3.2 million. Her voice carried across the courtroom. Distributed among 73 identified victims based on estimated lost wages and career damage. Mr. Cole receives $420,000 as primary plaintiff and documenting party. Ethan's breath caught. $420,000. More money than he'd made in the previous decade combined. Enough to erase debt and create safety and give Zara opportunities that had seemed impossibly distant 3 weeks ago. Mrs. Drake. Judge Morrison looked at Vanessa, who sat with her attorneys looking diminished in ways that expensive suits couldn't hide. You're agreeing to a 5-year management prohibition, third-party oversight of all hiring decisions and public acknowledgement that Prestige Elite Motors engage in systematic racial discrimination from 2019 through 2025. Yes, Your Honor. Vanessa's voice barely carried. And you understand this settlement doesn't preclude potential criminal charges if the Department of Justice determines your actions violated federal civil rights statutes. I understand. The gavel came down. Settlement approved. Payments to be distributed within 90 days. Policy reforms effective immediately. Case closed subject to compliance monitoring. The courtroom emptied slowly. Attorneys gathering papers, parties avoiding eye contact, justice administered in the mundane mechanics of legal procedure. Ethan stood in the hallway outside processing what had just happened. $420,000. Not enough to erase 4 years of grief or 18 years of being told he wasn't qualified or the countless humiliations that came from being invisible, but enough to change trajectories, enough to build something that mattered. Diana found him staring at nothing. You okay? I keep thinking about Naomi. Ethan's voice was quiet. She spent 3 years as a paralegal, making $38,000. We lost the house because we couldn't afford her medical bills. And now I'm getting $400,000 for documenting the same kind of injustice she spent her career fighting. She'd be proud. Diana's certainty was absolute. Not because of the money, because you turned pain into evidence and evidence into change. Rebecca Sterling appeared from the courtroom looking satisfied in the way people do when competence achieves intended results. Mr. Cole, I wanted to discuss something before you leave. She pulled him aside. UCLA's Vocational Partnership Program. I submitted your application based on the diagnostic work you demonstrated. The committee approved it. Full tuition coverage for a bachelor's in mechanical engineering. $28 per hour as a research assistant in my lab. Start date in 2 weeks if you're interested. Ethan had spent 18 years teaching himself what universities wouldn't teach him, had been rejected 47 times by employers who required credentials he couldn't afford to acquire, and now those credentials were being offered with salary attached. What's the catch, no catch? Rebecca's smile was genuine. Just recognition that competence exists outside traditional pathways. An institutional acknowledgement that we've been systematically excluding the exact talent we claim to value. I'm interested. Good. Because I have another opportunity. Diana's been telling me about her consulting arrangement. $200 per hour, 15 hours per week minimum. Rebecca pulled out her own card. I'd like to add UCLA's automotive research program to your client list. Same rate, another 10 hours per week. We're developing diagnostic methodologies for electric vehicle systems, and your acoustic analysis expertise would be invaluable. The math assembled itself automatically. UCLA research assistant, $28 per hour at 20 hours per week. Diana's consulting, $200 per hour at 15 hours. Rebecca's research program, $200 per hour at 10 hours. Total approximately $180,000 annually, plus tuition coverage, plus the settlement payment. From $16.50 per hour to economic security in 3 weeks. Because he'd fixed a Ferrari and refused to stay invisible and documented injustice with the same precision he used to diagnose mechanical failures. When do I start at UCLA? 2 weeks. Rebecca checked her phone. That gives you time to handle the media attention, which is about to intensify significantly. She was right. The settlement approval hit news outlets within an hour. The story had everything people wanted. Underdog vindication. Systematic injustice exposed. Wealthy villain forced to pay. A narrative simple enough for headlines and complex enough for think pieces. Ethan's phone became unusable. Interview requests, speaking invitations. Someone wanted television rights. Someone else wanted to option his life story. A publisher offered a book deal with an advance that matched his settlement payment. He ignored most of it, accepted one interview with a journalist Diana trusted, declined everything else because performing his pain for audiences felt like a different kind of exploitation. The months that followed were transition, learning how to be a student again at 37, figuring out how to navigate university systems that assumed everyone started college at 18, adjusting to consulting work that paid in hours what he used to make in weeks. Zara thrived. The settlement money meant private school, a place where science projects were encouraged rather than questioned, where teachers recognized competence instead of trying to simplify it, where being the daughter of someone who'd fought systematic discrimination was social currency rather than liability. The apartment changed too, 2 bedrooms to 3 bedrooms, Koreatown to Culver City, closer to UCLA, closer to Zara's new school, closer to the life they'd been building toward before Naomi got sick and everything collapsed into survival mode. 18 months passed in the compressed time-lapse that happened when life moved from crisis to stability. The video reached 31 million views and then faded from viral consciousness the way all viral moments eventually did. Other injustices became visible. Other stories demanded attention. The world's outrage moved on to newer provocations. But the changes remained. Prestige Elite Motors operated under court-mandated oversight, hiring practices, audited quarterly diversity metrics published annually. Vanessa sold her majority stake to investors who implemented the reforms she'd resisted. The Professional Standards Committee, dissolved under Department of Justice scrutiny, its blacklist network exposed and dismantled. 73 mechanics received settlement payments, informal apologies, and access to job placement services. 42 found new positions within 6 months. 18 started their own shops. 13 retired early with funds that made retirement possible. The remaining mechanics used their settlements to pursue education, relocate to better markets, or simply recover from careers that had been systematically destroyed. The institutional change was measurable, quantifiable, the kind of reform that happened when public attention forced systems to acknowledge their failures. But the personal change that was different, that was the 19-year-old who appeared at Diana's facility on a Tuesday afternoon carrying nothing but a worn notebook and the particular desperation of someone who'd been told they weren't good enough too many times. Mr. Cole. The kid's voice shook slightly. My name is Caleb Wright. My grandmother Ruth worked with your wife at County General Hospital. She showed me the video, said Mrs. Cole would be proud. Ethan looked up from the Porsche 911 he'd been diagnosing for 3 days without success. The kid was thin, black, carrying himself with the uncomfortable posture of someone who expected rejection. Come in. Caleb stepped into the diagnostic bay like he was entering sacred space. I know you're busy. He swallowed. I'm really good with cars. Self-taught. Been taking apart engines since I was 12. But nobody will hire me. Qualifications, none. No ASE certification, no formal training, just Caleb pulled out the notebook. 19 years of figuring things out. Ethan took the notebook, flipped through pages covered in careful handwriting, acoustic frequency analysis, thermal mapping diagrams, diagnostic decision trees that showed sophisticated understanding of how systems failed. The work was crude in presentation, but sophisticated in methodology. Where did you learn this? Taught myself. Library books. YouTube videos. Spent 3 years working at a tire shop in Fresno, just rotating tires and balancing wheels. But I'd listen to the engines. Track patterns. Document failures. Caleb's voice gained confidence. I know what mechanics miss. I can hear problems they can't find. The words hit like echoes. Ethan had said nearly identical things to people who hadn't listened. Had carried the same desperate certainty that competence existed even without credentials to prove it. You have somewhere to stay tonight. I drove 4 hours. Borrowed my cousin's car. Figured I'd sleep in it somewhere safe. No, you're staying with me. And tomorrow you're going to show me what you can do. Ethan gestured toward the Porsche. That 911 has an idle problem. Been trying to diagnose it for 3 days. Find it and we'll talk about what comes next. Caleb approached the Porsche with the careful reverence mechanics reserve for vehicles that have achieved classic status. He leaned in, listening, eyes closed, hands moving across components with touch that suggested familiarity earned through repetition. 35 minutes. That's how long it took Caleb to identify the vacuum leak in the brake booster hose. The intermittent crack that opened under specific temperature conditions, creating cyclical idle variations that Ethan had cataloged but couldn't source. How did you find that Ethan's voice carried genuine wonder? The idle variation had rhythm, not random. Cyclical. Caleb pointed to the crack. Temperature-based expansion and contraction. Rubber expands seals temporarily. Contracts, air gets in. The cycle matches the thermal properties of this specific hose material. Ethan stared. The diagnosis was perfect. The methodology was sophisticated. The explanation demonstrated understanding that exceeded most certified technicians. How old are you? 19. Caleb's uncertainty returned. Am I too young? My grandmother taught me to diagnose cars when I was 14. Ethan extended his hand. You're not too young. You're exactly the right age to start building what you're capable of. The handshake was firm. Caleb's eyes went wet. You mean, I'm offering you an apprenticeship. $22 per hour to start. UCLA Vocational Partnership Program. Full tuition coverage for mechanical engineering. 3-year commitment. You'll work alongside me, learn diagnostic methodology, build a portfolio that opens every door that's been closed. Caleb's breath came out shaky. Why would you do this for someone you just met? Because someone did it for me. Because 73 mechanics had careers destroyed by people who couldn't see past their prejudices. Because the system that excluded me is the same system that's excluding you. Ethan's voice hardened. And because Diana Hartwell taught me that justice isn't just fixing what's broken, it's preventing the next generation from having to fight the same battles. When do I start? You started 35 minutes ago when you found what I couldn't. Ethan pulled out his phone. I'm calling Diana. She has housing assistance for program participants. You'll have an apartment by next week, UCLA enrollment by next month, and a career that won't depend on whether people can see past what they expect. Caleb wiped his eyes. My grandmother said something else. About your wife, what did she say? That Mrs. Cole used to tell the night shift that talent doesn't need permission from people who don't understand it. That someday the world would figure out what you were worth. Ruth's voice carried through Caleb's memory. She said Mrs. Cole didn't live to see it, but she knew it would happen. Ethan felt something crack in his chest, the grief that lived there permanently banked but never extinguished. Naomi would have loved this, would have cataloged it as evidence that patience and documentation and refusing to accept injustice eventually produce change. Tell Ruth thank you for remembering, for teaching you, for making sure Naomi's words didn't die with harm. 2 years became the distance markers. 2 years since Vanessa threw keys. 2 years since Ethan stopped being invisible. 2 years of institutional change and personal transformation, and the slow work of building something that mattered beyond individual vindication. The building stood in South Los Angeles, where property values hadn't yet gentrified beyond reach. 15,000 square feet, formerly a warehouse converted with settlement funds and donations, and the kind of community investment that happened when people believed in the mission. Naomi Cole Memorial Automotive Training Center. The name appeared in brushed steel letters above the entrance. Simple, dignified, permanent. Opening day brought crowds. 73 mechanics whose settlements had funded this place. Diana and Rebecca with checkbooks that had contributed additional capital. Community members who understood that education access was the difference between cycles of poverty and trajectories toward stability. Media covering the story because systematic change was newsworthy even if it happened slowly. Ethan stood at the podium feeling Zara's hand in his. She was 10 now, taller, more confident, still gap-toothed, but growing into features that would someday be beautiful. Still asking questions that required complicated answers. The program worked simply. Free diagnostic training for anyone who wanted it. No credentials required. No applications rejected based on background or demographics or anything except willingness to learn. 30 students per year. Full scholarships. Equipment that matched what luxury dealerships used. Instruction from mechanics who understood that competence existed independent of traditional pathways. Caleb Wright stood to Ethan's left. 21 years old now. Assistant Director of Training. UCLA degree in progress. Diagnostic skills that had already identified problems that stumped senior technicians. The first graduate of the program that now bore his mentor's wife's name. My wife Naomi believed that excellence doesn't require permission. Ethan's voice carried across the assembled crowd. She spent her career as a paralegal fighting employment discrimination, making $38,000 per year, trying to ensure that civil rights statutes actually protected people instead of just existing on paper. He paused, letting the weight settle. She died 4 years before I fixed that Ferrari. 4 years before the video went viral. 4 years before any of this became possible. But she knew. Ethan's voice strengthened. She knew that talent doesn't need validation from systems designed to exclude it. She knew that documentation defeats denial. She knew that patience outlasts prejudice. And she knew that the only thing more powerful than individual success is institutional change that makes success accessible to everyone. He gestured toward the building behind him. This center exists because 73 mechanics had their careers systematically destroyed. Because Diana Hartwell decided to document patterns instead of accept explanations. Because Rebecca Sterling validated diagnostic work that credential requirements would have excluded. Because Caleb Wright drove 4 hours with nothing but a notebook and the faith that competence would eventually be recognized. It exists because all of you decided that the system that excluded us doesn't deserve to survive unchanged. The plaque was unveiled, bronze professionally cast, mounted permanently on the lobby wall. Naomi Cole, 1985-2020. Excellence has no prerequisites except dedication and heart. Zara stepped forward, read the inscription, looked up at her father with eyes that held questions. Dad. Her voice was quiet beneath the crowd noise. Is this bigger than the sky? Ethan knelt, brought himself to her eye level the way he did for important conversations. Mom used to say that phrase when she wanted us to aim for things that felt impossible. When she wanted us to believe that limits were just other people's expectations. I know. Zara touched the plaque. But is this bigger than the sky? Ethan looked at the building, at the equipment visible through glass walls, at the 73 mechanics whose settlement payments had funded this transformation, at Caleb preparing to teach the first class next week, at the 30 students already enrolled carrying the same desperate hope that competence would finally matter more than credentials. No, baby, this isn't bigger than the sky. He pulled her close. This is the sky, and we built it together. You and me and everyone who refused to accept that injustice was permanent. The crowd moved inside. Tours of the facility, equipment demonstrations. Caleb explaining diagnostic methodology to journalists who'd never considered that acoustic analysis could identify problems computers missed. Diana discussing expansion plans. Rebecca announcing UCLA's partnership agreement. Ethan found himself standing alone in the lobby, staring at Naomi's plaque, remembering hospital rooms and legal briefs and the way she'd explained civil rights statutes while dying from cancer they couldn't afford to treat properly. The Ferrari stood in the center of the lobby, the 488 GTB that had started everything. Ethan had sold it for $320,000, then bought it back for $280,000 when the buyer decided exotic cars were poor investments. Now it served as training equipment, students learning on the same machine that had exposed systematic discrimination. Someone had mounted a plaque beside it too. This vehicle represents a promise kept, a truth revealed, and a reminder that competence requires no permission except the courage to demonstrate it. The words felt right, permanent, the kind of language that would outlast viral videos and news cycles in the temporary attention spans that defined modern outrage. Diana appeared at his shoulder. Quite a turnout. People want to believe change is possible. Ethan kept his eyes on the Ferrari. Today we're giving them evidence. How does it feel incomplete? He turned to face her. 73 mechanics got settlements. 30 students per year get training. That's 103 people directly helped. But the system that excluded them still exists, still operates, still finds new ways to gatekeep opportunity. You're not responsible for fixing everything. I'm responsible for fixing the parts I can reach. Ethan's voice was firm. This center helps 30 people per year. That's 900 people over 30 years. 900 mechanics who won't face what I faced, what those 73 faced, what Caleb faced. Diana smiled. You sound like someone planning long-term. I'm planning permanent. This isn't about temporary visibility. This is about building infrastructure that survives after viral attention fades. Ethan gestured at the facility. Endowment funded, community supported, institutionally embedded. The kind of change that outlasts individual champions. Naomi would approve. Naomi would demand we do more. Ethan's laugh was affectionate. She'd want partnerships with every community college, federal funding, national expansion. She'd turn this into a movement instead of a program. So do that. Maybe. Someday. Ethan looked at Zara across the lobby explaining engine components to a journalist with the confidence of someone who'd learned that knowledge was power. Right now, I'm focused on making sure this works, that the first 30 students graduate with skills that translate to careers, that Caleb's methodology gets documented and published and becomes teachable. Small steps. Naomi used to say that distance is just accumulated steps in the right direction. Ethan pulled out his phone, showed Diana a text from Hannah Brooks, one of the 73. She'd used her settlement to open a shop in Oakland, hired 5 mechanics, all minorities, all formally rejected by the same system that had excluded her. The text read, first-year profits exceeded projections. Hired 2 more technicians today. Both came from your training program. This is what change looks like. Thank you, multiplication. Diana read the text twice. You're not just training mechanics, you're training people who will train the next generation. That's the idea, institutional change that compounds. Ethan pocketed his phone. Vanessa destroyed 73 careers in 6 years. This center creates 30 new careers per year. In 3 years, we've erased her damage. In 10 years, we've created net positive. In 30 years, we've changed the industry. Assuming the center survives that long. It will, because it's not dependent on me. Ethan gestured toward Caleb. He'll run it after I move on. Then he'll train someone else to run it after him. That's how institutions outlast individuals. The event wound down, crowds dispersed, journalists collected footage. Students explored equipment they'd use starting Monday. The building settled into the quiet that comes after celebration ends and work begins. Ethan found himself back at Naomi's plaque, tracing letters with his finger, feeling the permanence of bronze and the impermanence of everything else. Zara appeared beside him, silent, just standing close the way she did when processing things too big for immediate words. You miss her, not a question, an observation, every day. Ethan's voice was quiet, every single day. Would she like this place? She'd love it. She'd also critique it, find everything we could improve, demand we do better. Ethan smiled. Your mom didn't believe in accepting good enough when excellent was possible. Is that why you're always fixing things? Machines are easier to fix than people. You can diagnose problems, replace broken parts, Test until everything works correctly. Ethan knelt beside her. People are more complicated, systems even more so. But the methodology is the same. Identify the failure, document the evidence, implement the repair, test to ensure it works. And if it doesn't work, then you try again. Different approach, different tools, different methodology. Ethan pulled her close. But you never stop trying, because accepting that things are broken is how injustice becomes permanent. They sat together on the lobby floor, father and daughter, surrounded by machinery and memory and the infrastructure of change that would outlast both of them. Outside Los Angeles continued its indifferent sprawl, traffic and commerce and the million small injustices that happened every day in a city too big to notice individual suffering. But in this corner, in this 15,000 square feet of converted warehouse, something had shifted. 73 mechanics vindicated, 30 students per year trained, one woman's memory honored, one man's competence finally recognized, one daughter learning that fighting back was possible when you had evidence and patience and refusal to accept that the way things were was the way things had to stay. Not revolution, not even dramatic transformation, just the slow accumulation of small changes that eventually became institutional reform. Caleb locked up at 8, checked equipment, set alarms, ensured everything was secured for Monday's first official day of training. Thank you. His words were simple, insufficient for what he meant, but the best language offered. For seeing what I could be instead of what I looked like. I saw what you demonstrated, Ethan corrected gently. Your competence made itself visible. I just provided the opportunity to prove it. Most people don't. Most people are scared that your success challenges their assumptions about who deserves opportunity. Ethan walked toward his car. Naomi used to say that prejudice is just fear wearing the mask of principle. People aren't afraid of black mechanics. They're afraid of admitting that credentials and pedigree and traditional pathways aren't the only routes to excellence. What changed for you? What made people finally see nothing changed about me? I was always competent, always qualified, always capable of fixing that Ferrari. Ethan unlocked his car. What changed was visibility. Vanessa made my competence impossible to ignore by challenging it publicly. The video made dismissing me impossible. The settlement made institutional change mandatory. So you needed her to be racist on camera. I needed the system's injustice to become undeniable. Ethan climbed into his car. Individual prejudice is easy to dismiss. Individual competence is easy to ignore. But systematic discrimination documented across 73 cases becomes impossible to explain away. That's what creates change. Not one person's vindication. 73 people's evidence assembled into irrefutable pattern. The drive home took 20 minutes through evening traffic that cared nothing about training centers or memorial plaques or the distance between injustice and repair. Ethan navigated automatically mind elsewhere, processing everything that had changed in 2 years. From invisible to visible, from excluded to essential, from janitor cleaning Ferraris to consultant diagnosing them for $200 per hour, from father worried about rent to father planning Zara's college fund. The transformations were measurable, quantifiable. The kind of success that people called the American dream when it happened to people they approved of and called suspicious when it happened to people who'd fought discrimination to achieve it. But the distance between Saturday afternoon with keys at his feet and Tuesday evening opening a training center named for his dead wife felt like crossing continents rather than 2 years. The geography of institutional change was vast and difficult and frequently impossible to navigate. Except sometimes it wasn't. Sometimes patience and documentation and refusal to stay invisible actually produced justice. Sometimes a system worked not because it was designed to work, but because enough people forced it to work through the sheer accumulation of evidence that denial became impossible. Zara was asleep when he got home, exhausted by the day's excitement and emotion. Ethan stood in her doorway watching her breathe, 10 years old, growing into someone Naomi would recognize, smart and stubborn and unwilling to accept simple answers when complicated truth was available. The kind of daughter who asked if training centers were bigger than the sky and demanded real responses instead of platitudes. His phone buzzed. Text from Diana. Final count: 47 journalists covered the opening. 11 major outlets. Estimated reach 80 million people. The story's going to have legs. Then another text from Rebecca. UCLA board approved expansion funding. We're adding 20 more slots per year starting next fall. 60 students total. Your methodology is becoming curriculum. Then Caleb. Then, first class roster is full. 30 students, average age 22. 80% minorities, 100% people who've been told they weren't qualified, ready to prove everyone wrong. The notifications kept coming. Mechanics from the 73 sharing success stories, students asking questions about enrollment, journalists requesting follow-up interviews. The world's attention settling on this corner where injustice had been documented and justice had eventually materialized. Ethan silenced his phone, walked to the window. Los Angeles stretched out below lights marking the geography of a city where millions of small struggles happen daily. People fighting for recognition, for opportunity, for the chance to demonstrate competence that systems were designed to ignore. Most of those struggles wouldn't end like his had. Most people who documented discrimination wouldn't get viral videos and federal settlements and training centers named for their spouses. Most injustice would remain invisible. Most talent would stay undiscovered. Most prejudice would operate unchallenged. But this corner had changed. These 73 mechanics had been vindicated. These 30 students per year would be trained. This one woman's memory would be honored in bronze and brick in the permanent infrastructure of institutional reform. Not the whole world, not even most of it, but the corner where they stood. That was different now, and Naomi had taught him that corners were enough, that you didn't fix everything. You fixed what you could reach. You documented what you discovered. You built what was possible, and you trusted that other people in other corners would do the same until eventually the accumulated changes became transformation. He pulled out his phone one final time, opened the photograph he kept of Naomi from before the cancer, before the hospital, before everything collapsed into medical bills and grief and the geography of loss. She was laughing, some joke he couldn't remember now, hair natural, eyes bright with the particular joy that came from believing the world could be better if people just decided to make it so. We did it, his whisper filled the empty room. Not everything, not even most of what you wanted. But we changed our corner, built something permanent, made sure what happened to me doesn't happen to the next 30 students every year for as long as this place stands. The photograph didn't respond. Photographs never did. But Ethan felt the weight of her approval anyway, felt the particular certainty that came from honoring memory through action rather than just mourning. Bigger than the sky. The phrase had meant dreaming impossibly when Naomi first said it, had meant aiming beyond what seemed achievable, had meant refusing to accept limits that other people tried to impose. Now it meant something different, something more concrete. It meant the training center, the 73 settlements, the institutional reforms, the documented evidence that systematic discrimination could be challenged and occasionally defeated if enough people cared enough to fight carefully enough to win. It meant that talent genuinely didn't need permission from people who couldn't recognize it. That patience actually did outlast prejudice. That justice delayed wasn't always justice denied if the delay was spent building irrefutable cases instead of just accepting defeat. Outside the city continued its indifferent sprawl. But in this apartment, in this corner, the man who'd been told he belonged with a mop bucket was planning curriculum for students who'd been told they didn't belong at all, was honoring his wife's memory by creating infrastructure that would outlast both of them, was teaching his daughter that fighting back was possible when you had evidence and patience and the refusal to believe that the way things were was the way things had to stay. Not revolution, not dramatic transformation, just the slow accumulation of small changes that eventually became institutional reform. Just corners changing one at a time until enough corners had changed that the whole landscape looked different. Just people deciding that justice wasn't permanent and then doing the work to prove it. Just bigger than the sky.